Hi, you're listening to Yellow Glitter, a podcast on mindfulness through the eyes and soul of a gay Asian. I'm your host, Stephen Wakabayashi, and you're listening to a very special episode. On this episode, we have an amazing guest. She has been a 5-time Grammy and Emmy-nominated comedian and one of Rolling Stone magazine's 50 best stand-up comics of all times. CNN called her comedians shaping the American comedy landscape. And most recently, stunned America, singing her way through the wildly popular breakout hit show, The Masked Singer. She is currently on tour with her international Fresh Off The Bloat tour and has a brand new podcast where each week she interviews people you know and people she thinks you should know if you don't know already. Her podcast has 36 episodes in the first season and it includes guests such as Jonathan Van Ness, Kat Von D, Michael Yo, Kathy Griffin, Quentin Tarantino, Diablo Cody, and along with her brand new dog, Lucia. I'm so excited to announce Margaret Cho. Hi, Margaret.
Hi.
I'm so excited to have you on this show to chat together. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Your agent had reached out to me after I had mentioned you on my Queer Tea article as a queer Asian breaking stereotypes and being such a champion of both queer and Asian perspectives. And I definitely want to just say thank you so much for representing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. And first off, you do so much. You're a comedian, singer-songwriter, actress, fashion designer, author. You've done it all. And I had a chance to take a look at where you started. And you mentioned a few times about how you got started in this comedy journey. And I know that you had mentioned you dropped out of college. And I'm so really curious, what inspired you to do that?
Well, I dropped out of high school, actually. I mean, I don't think that there was anything that I wanted to do other than comedy. There was never a sense of really ever wanting anything else out of life. There was nothing for me in school. There was nothing for me that I wanted to learn. I just wanted to be a comedian. And I knew that was my journey. And fortunately, I was, I think, just free enough and foolish enough to really just do what I wanted with my life, which I think is pretty great. And so I set off pretty early.
Yeah. What was kind of the moment when it just clicked and you were like, oh my God, comedy, that's it?
Well, I just knew that this was like it. And I was in San Francisco at the time in the 70s and the 80s. Going to go see comedy was actually a very big popular activity. And so there was actually a very kind of a track for me to follow. Like I knew that there were comedy clubs. I knew that I could go to them. I could sign up. I could go see comedians. I could attach myself to comedians who were established and worked for them. So there was a kind of a layout of a kind of a business or model I could follow, which was lucky.
One of the things I really related to was this changing of Asian stereotypes of what we're meant to do especially for second generation Asians. I actually had gone to college trying to be a doctor. I studied and I ended up completely shifting my career, but this was after college. And I'm just wondering if you had any struggles kind of deciding to pivot, dropping out of school and going through comedy, especially from the lens of Asian background.
Well, I started so young that it was really, I didn't have to really shift anything. And of course it was upsetting for my family, but I had always been kind of a rebellious kid anyway, so they didn't expect a lot from me. Like I kind of rejected everything fairly early on. And so to the point of like, they knew I wasn't going to do what they wanted. I wasn't going to be going to school. I wasn't going to be going to church. I wasn't going to be going to these colleges that they wanted me to go to. I wasn't going to have a kind of a life that their friends' kids had, which their friends' kids were all going to like Ivy League schools, and they were, doing very, very like, good stuff for their family. And I just wasn't interested. And I was punk rock. I was wild. And that was also partially my parents' fault, because they had a bookstore in a gay neighborhood. They employed all of these queers who were like getting tattoos in the 70s and 80s, like full body tattoos. They were getting piercings like in the 70s and 80s. Like this is early on. And so they were excited about Harry Milk. They were excited about gay politics. They were excited about gay pride. They were riding with the dykes on bikes. It was like my family were in this sort of like queer society already. And so they introduced me to these possibilities that were not available to me as a Korean kid, but were as a queer kid.
Wow. Yeah. How did they end up with a bookstore in the queer neighborhood of San Francisco? I'm so curious.
Well, my father was always very literary. He loves reading. He loves books. He loves writing. He loved San Francisco because he wanted to have a bookstore like City Lights, which was where like the Beats rode in the 60s in San Francisco, North Beach. And so he wanted to have a bookstore like that bookstore that was a community center. And the one that was available was Paperback Traffic, which was on Polk Street in the 70s. And so he bought it. And buying into this bookstore, he bought into the queer community there. And this was before AIDS. This was like in the height of gay chic. So this is like 70s, like crazy fun San Francisco, where it was really amazing and really exciting to be young and to be around that. And so that's how they ended up there. I mean, I don't know how like open my family was towards homosexuality exactly, but buying into this business was just what sort of clinched them into this like lifestyle. And then they were all friends with gay people, and they were all I think just fitting in, and that's really the example of adulthood that I got, is to be queer, to be literary, to have good taste, to be pierced and to be tattooed, and to be political.
Yeah. Wow. And during that time, there was so much happening in San Francisco too. It was kind of the epicenter of the queer movement, right?
It was so alive, and then it was so dead because AIDS came along. This is sort of right before AIDS, and then so you saw how exciting it was and how great it was, and then suddenly the disease, and suddenly this plague, and suddenly everybody was gone, and it was really shocking and really fast and really a mystery. But it was also the truth of what happened. And then the community coming back after that was really, it took a long time. And to witness that was really incredible too.
Wow. How was that like, just seeing that shift, back then, when AIDS was starting to come up, people with AIDS were not even admitted to hospitals,
Right.
And
it was shocking. It was very shocking.
How was that? How was navigating that?
It was really just devastating because we didn't understand anything about the disease. And while it was happening, it was just claiming the lives of so many young people, and really the whole neighborhood was completely decimated in like a matter of a couple of years, very short time. And so it was very fast, very shocking. And it was almost like not real because it was so strange. But it happened very, very quickly. And the incredible homophobia and just callousness of the government, and the system not acknowledging that it was happening either. It was just a very terrible, very strange time. Even to think about it now, it's really surreal.
It is, and you see some of that stuff still echoing, the sentiments within conservative parts of the government. And I just want to kind of also understand, you know, how was it like navigating being queer, but also being Asian, and even just coming out to your parents?
Well, they actually were fine with my gayness. They were fine, like, with me being straight. They have a problem with bisexuality, which they still do. They still don't think it's real. And I think my parents have a very 70s view of homosexuality, which is like, if you're gay, you're gay, and that's it. That there's no degrees of gayness, that you're just gay. And if you're not gay, then you're straight.
Yeah.
And anything that is not that, is really not real to them. So they still don't fully understand. And I think it's kind of, actually, they're not alone in that. I mean, I have relationships a lot, like, with older gay people who also believe that too, who are just like, well, bisexuality is not real. It's an excuse that we give when we're not ready to fully come out, and you'll be ready to come out eventually.
Wow.
You know, weird place to be. So my family were always fine with queerness. They've always been fine with me being gay, and they really have a problem with my bisexuality. They think that's not real.
Wow.
That's a phase.
Wow. I think there's so many stigmas and stereotypes too associated with being bisexual, right? That a lot of people think, it's, you have, like you mentioned, it's, some people say, well, you haven't decided yet. Some people think you just want everything, and
or it's like you're immature, or you're not fully developed, or you're not at the destination that you'll arrive at eventually. It's almost like you're just not there yet. And it's fine, that's fine, but it's like, it's also not true to who I am. But it's something that you learn to accept, that this kind of weirdness around bisexuality. I mean, we experience it even within ourselves. This thing of like, am I fully, like, not realized as a person yet because I'm here? And it's, it's weird.
Yeah. Did you ever think that maybe this was because a lot of people say, right, it's a phase? And did you ever think to yourself, is this a phase?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Also, like, if I get into a relationship with a heterosexual relationship with a man, then I'm like, oh my God, I must just be straight. Or if I get in a relationship with a woman, I'm like, oh my God, I'm just gay. And then it's like, you kind of can't, like, it's weird. You kind of, your fears are realized about who you might not be. And it's just a funny thing, because it's like, we just don't have a society that really conveniently explains, like, bisexuality to itself. So we're supposed to define it, but we don't even know.
You almost try to put yourself in these buckets, right? Some bucket that has existed, so that you can start to identify with not just yourself, but the community, right? You almost want to figure out what communities you're associated with. And it is so challenging. And I'm curious, if you can explain to someone, kind of from your perspective, how you define bisexuality, how would you define it?
Well, I just define it as the truth of the matter is that I am attracted to female-bodied, male-bodied people. It has very little to do actually with gender now, because gender to me has always been an infinite expression. There's so many different ways to express who we are gender-wise, that it goes beyond definition. It's infinite. So it's really, to me, it's a very human way to be. I fall in love, and then I definitely am kind of, and never in a way that I can't really predict who that's going to be or what that's going to look like. And I don't know. It's like really like the definition of not having a type. I really don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have a bunch of listeners too who identify as being bisexual, or they're trying to figure out their sexuality too. And I'm just curious if there's any advice that you might have on just how would you even start to think about these identities?
I think it's really just about enjoying it. Like, when you really feel like what you're drawn to is good, and it's good to explore, and also different kinds of ways of being intimate, whether that's through a BDSM, which I think has really been helpful. and different ways of defining even in leather and how we act towards people, or even like top and bottoming. Like it's kind of like opening yourself up to all of the aspects of being in sex. And I think that's helpful too. Because it's sort of almost the larger your playing field, the more you narrow down desire, and it does really improve. So I think it's like not to be afraid of trying.
Yeah, almost going to the ice cream store and asking for these samples.
Yeah, asking for all of the flavors, because you can taste everything and then make a decision from there. And then it becomes a little bit easier, because then you're like, I have narrowed it down to some things. And then also being glad that we're not limited to these ideas of gender and what society views of who should be together.
Yes. And I think, especially for Americans, we have a beautiful opportunity to explore compared to, unfortunately, what some people face in other countries, right?
Right.
Even just plain homosexuality, being a lesbian, being gay, you can get murdered. And
I know, it's horrifying. And so we're so lucky that we have the freedom, and also the way that the world is in, and like dating online, like with like apps. There's so many apps. You really are amazed. It's amazing the variety of people that you can meet and kind of look to be sexual towards, or even intimate or anything. So it's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. You brought up a really interesting point. So I ask my guests frequently about this topic, about these dating apps, and they have many thoughts about it. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on these dating apps right now?
I love it. I mean, I have not been single in the age of apps. So this is my first year of actually getting into it, and I love it. Like, it's exciting because I get to meet all sorts of different people who I would not necessarily meet, and with different age ranges, racially different, class-wise different interests and backgrounds, and so I find it really amazing. So I like it a lot.
Yeah. And there is this other viewpoint too, where some people think that there are communities, a lot of queer people who are really stuck on these apps too, right? They don't go out anymore. They don't go to bars. And I've also seen a trend where a lot of the bars that we used to go and meet people are becoming fairly empty now. And I'm curious, my thought was, hey, maybe the apps had influenced this too.
Maybe. I mean, I think that's unfortunate, because bars have traditionally been like kind of our meeting places, and outside of sex or relationships, they're mostly places for us to be political together, to just hang out, to watch TV even, to just meet and have fun with friends. And so, the gay bar, in my mind, it's still a very large place in my social structure. It's part of my life anyway. So I wouldn't ever get away from that. And like, if I'm hooking up with somebody, it's easy to meet at bars, but it's also most likely that I would meet them in a different context somewhere else.
Yes. Somewhere safe, right?
Yeah. Always. Oh yeah, you got to make sure they don't kill you, and then like you have to make sure like it's the right person. I mean, because a lot of people catfish, so you don't know.
Oh yes, they
who's
do,
who and what's going on.
Oh my gosh.
So you got to be safe. Yeah.
Oh my God, I've been catfished so many times.
I know, it's so weird. I don't know why anybody would do that, because it's like, what the hell? I mean, it's just very strange.
And it's you're not turned on, right? When the catfish happens and they show up, you're like, I'm leaving now.
Yeah, like, why would you do that? I don't know.
And have you seen the Netflix show, The Circle? It's a social game where they have people either play themselves or a different persona. And the entire TV show is around talking to each other on this chat application. And they vote each other off. Yeah. And so there are a couple people who go on this show specifically to catfish. And so they talk about how they choose images, what kind of person they want to represent, and what they want to do as a catfish. And it was interesting because somebody had mentioned the reason they catfish was to break stereotypes, break norms. And I was thinking, that's really interesting that someone would use catfishing as a tool of activism.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of that, but I mean, whatever, that's cool, yeah. But I think it's weird. Yeah. I don't like being catfished. I don't think I don't think I would enjoy it. No.
No.
That's so weird.
Yeah, it's very. And, I kind of want to turn back a little bit, turn back time. And I read a little bit about you and how you came to be in this world. And I learned that you grew up in both Korea and in America. And I just want to know what happened and how was that like?
Well, my father was deported for overstaying his student visa in 1973. So I ended up going back to Korea with him often and sort of being shuttled back between relatives and then finally coming back to America. So I spent a lot of time in Korea as a really little kid. But finally they kind of figured it out, the citizenship thing and the money thing. But it was a lot of, it was just sort of a lot of getting used to new environments as a kid and then having lots of different caretakers. And then in Korea, or any Asian household, the furniture, all of the corners of the tables have metal, so it's really dangerous. So I was got a lot of weird injuries all over my body from those
your head,
metal corners of tables. Always head. On your head or your leg. It would split your body open. Yeah. It's really the most dangerous furniture of all of the ethnicities.
Yes.
I think we have the most dangerous, scary furniture.
And then you have the white parents now who pad everything, right? They had all these padding on the furniture for the kids. And you're
I know. We were so at risk when we were growing up from the crazy furniture.
And I kept hitting my head, and we had when I was growing up. So I am Taiwanese and Japanese, and my mom, she's Taiwanese, and when I grew up, every time I'd bump my head on the bar, we had a bar in the kitchen with a part on the very top that jutted out, and it was wood. And I know. And I kept running in the house, and you make these sharp turns as a kid, right? You're like, I'm gonna go over there, but let me just go zoom. And then I would hit my head, and my mom's like, you just have to do better.
Yeah, it's really scary. It's we just constantly injured ourselves. And then toys and stuff growing up in the 70s were pretty dangerous. Everything big wheels that you would ride in the street and just scary shit that would fly off of the Star Wars X-Wing fighters. They would shoot out these pellets that were always up somebody's nose or in somebody's eyes. It was always really scary.
And then you just swallow and you're like, okay, moving on.
Very scary shit.
Yeah, and I'm so curious, so you spent time in Korea, and does your family identify a lot more as Americans or as Koreans? And
they're Koreans. They'll never really be Americans. They never even though they spent more time here than they ever did in Korea, their mindset is we're going back to the mothership at some point. It's always an expedition. It's never we've emigrated to become Americans. We're here to get what we need and we're going back. So there's never ever a sense of needing to learn everything, needing to vote, needing to actually put down roots or anything. It was always an expedition, never a destination.
Yeah, it's an extended vacation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but what they did want American kids. They wanted us to stay here and be here, but they didn't want to stay themselves.
That's really fascinating. Do you have an idea of why?
I don't know, but I get that. In my mind, sometimes I think, eventually I'll retire. When I retire, I'll move to Seoul. Or I'll move to I think in my mind I'll move to Fukuoka.
Yeah.
Like I'll go, like I'll probably live in like either Fukuoka or like maybe, outside of Tokyo, like not Tokyo, but like just outside, something like that.
I love Japan.
And I love Japan.
Oh my gosh.
Then I think like maybe that would be hard. But then when I go to Japan, like if I travel for like a month and I get really burnt out. Like I want to go home. Like I want to go to America.
It's a lot. And I have friends who've never been to Tokyo, and I'm like, you've been in New York? Tokyo is another ball game.
Yeah. I mean, I love Japan and I love Korea, but I do get burnt out in a way there that I don't in America. So I don't know if I would feel as settled there if I lived there. But I really followed my retirement idea.
Yeah, I'm curious. So you grew up in this household, in the Korean household. Did you speak English or Korean primarily when you're at home?
We spoke English and then they spoke in Korean to us. And we couldn't answer in Korean because they wanted us to be American and not have an accent, but they also didn't want to learn English. So they would speak Korean to us and we would have to answer in English. And because of that, I speak Korean, but in a very jolty, hesitant way. My family also speaks Japanese too.
Oh, really?
But they're very it had to do with my grandfather. He worked for the Japanese during the war. So they were more comfortable at that point speaking Japanese. And they enjoyed reading Japanese, like all of the books that they had were in Japanese. And so I think that there was more of a comfort with Japanese. But, they're actually Korean.
That is so fascinating. And this whole, you know, I definitely relate with it too, because I was born and raised in LA, and I was in an Asian community while my father was alive. So he was very adamant about being Japanese, but he wanted me to be American too. And so he wanted me to practice English. He wanted to move us towards a very white-centric neighborhood rather than to live within an Asian community. And there was and there was this almost this shedding of an Asian identity. But when you actually shed it and you kind of move away from it, it actually made my father passed away, but it made my mother really sad. And I asked my mother, I'm like, well, you wanted me to Americanize so much, but when I had done that, you were kind of sad about it.
Right. It's like you lost, something's lost in the translation. It's almost as if they want you to inherently want to remain Asian. Which is not, that's not what they're teaching us to do. Yes. They're teaching us to be fully Americanized, and yet they have this thing of they wish that we would wish for home or be homesick for Asia, but we never lived there. So there was no way that I could have that sort of same thing, that same kind of homesickness or whatever. But so you can't have it both ways. You can't be Americanized and still long for Asia. It's like you got to have it one or the other. It's really funny.
And especially, I think, when you're born in America, it's totally different, right? Because this is your home that you identify with. This is your birth certificate. This is where you're a citizen of, right? Naturalized in. And I'm curious I'm curious about kind of how you grew up with this. You moved back to America, and at the time too, across all America, it was pretty not diverse, right? And I'm curious if you had any struggles navigating that.
Yeah, for sure. And also struggles with my own families, their own racism, their own fear about the other, their own ideas of what is the right way to be American, whether it's we're going to go Christian school or we're going to go to public school and all that. So I kind of worked all that out with my parents because they were didn't understand. And, they had this period in the 80s where they really wanted to be white. And so I was going to a Christian school. I was going to skiing, which I think is the whitest thing that you can do.
It is skiing and snowboarding. Yes.
Super white. And it was just such a it was so preppy, like everybody wanted to be preppy. And so it was a weird thing of like, because my parents were suddenly middle class, like suddenly went from like lower class to middle class. And then that was a big shift.
I'm curious, what is your relationship with the Korean culture now? Are you prideful of it? Or how do you identify with it?
I am. Well, now it's like food related. Like it's like I need to go eat Korean food. I need to go to Koreatown. Like I need to go.
Yes.
There's like a little Koreatown kind of where I live too. So that like I need to go there. Like I need to go to Korea and eat. I need to go so to me it's really like all based around food and movies and going to like CGV, like the movie theater in Koreatown, like going to the spas. Like it's like more like the Koreanness is sort of when I reach for comfort, that's what I go for, is like the food, the movies, K-pop, all that kind of stuff to me is like in a comfort zone.
Yes. I had gone through this boomerang. So I was trying to Americanize. My family wanted me to Americanize. And as part of it, I built all of these internalized racism within myself. And for the longest time, I ended up not wanting to have anything to do with the Asian culture because I was really anti that as a kid. And as I was growing up, I had seen, some of my ways in terms of how I navigated even dating. For example, I had a really tough time dating Asian people. And it wasn't until in the past few years, actually, I had gone back to Asia. I spent considerable time in Japan to really get to know my culture and to understand it a lot better, that I finally had this love that really grew out of identifying with this as myself and my identity. And I'm curious if you've ever had that boomerang within yourself, kind of coming home.
Yeah, like I think when I was much younger, and then now it's definitely different. Like now I always had issues like dating Asian women. So I'm dating an Asian woman now who's much younger than me. And it's really shocking because it's like, it's very strange, like feeling of like, oh, this is very subversion of the relationship that I usually have with younger Asian women, which is very maternal. But and now it's like the sexual relationship, which is really wild and crazy. And then now it's like very like, to me, it's really perverse, but it's also really sexy because it's like, oh, this is like us really rebelling against the way we were raised. So I think that I take a real delight in that now because it's like all of my biases and internalized racism is now working towards like a better sexual future for myself. So it's nice.
And I read a statistic somewhere that about interracial relationships, and Asian women are actually the highest, most likely to go into an interracial relationship.
Right. And so being in a relationship with another Asian American woman is really also very triggering for other people. Especially white men get real mad. And you can't, it's weird because it's like they have this like reflexive kind of thing of like, wait a second, you're supposed to be with one of us, but it's like, we're together, and that sort of makes them really like invisible, and they can't deal.
Wow. Have they said anything? Have they done anything?
Well, you can feel it. Like you can feel like this kind of like
unease,
unease of like jealousy, and it's like also voyeurism. It's also like this sexuality that's not for them at all. And it's like very strange she's very lovely, and it's like this thing of like, you can feel the tension around it, where I don't feel that sort of thing in any other context. Anywhere, partnered with anybody else. This is the first time I've actually said that, because she's much younger than me, she's very attractive and appears to be heterosexual. And we both appear very femme, very hetero, that kind of thing. So it's a threat. It's a viable kind of threat.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I made this shift as well, and I started dating Asian men, and there's so much that started stirring up. Uncomfortability, just revisiting this
Right.
internalized racism kind of head to head, right?
It's a trip. It's like sticky rice, you know? It's that they used to always call it sticky rice, but it's like when you actually do partake in it, there's so much to get into because we do stick together in so many ways that it becomes a beautiful exploration.
Yeah, and I always recommend my Asian friends. I say, just try it. You never know what it's going to be like, and explore, just like you said, right? Go in an ice cream shop, explore.
Right, but it's you explore, but it's also like this is like very potent because this is like it's really triggering to like white guys because it's like white guys are always like the ones that they like the Asians, and so when you're like not with a white guy, it really freaks them out.
It's like they're thinking, so well, why don't you want me? Right? They question themselves.
Yeah, they're like, what's going on? And then what if you all did this? What's going to happen? Like, it's really a funny thing. Like, it's so weird.
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit to, you had mentioned you had gone to school, a Christian school, and you mentioned in some of the talks you've given, some of the stuff you've written about your spirituality. And I kind of wanted to understand a little bit better. Where did that come from?
Well, it's like my family is like also very Christian. Part of that has to do with like my grandfather being a minister at the Kamnikyohe, which is like the big church in San Francisco that was like where, a lot of the immigrants sort of like kind of got together, and there's a lot of banking systems that kind of created from there. So there was a lot of like shift towards spirituality in my family, and my mother's always Buddhist too, so she has a long history of like Buddhism in her family. So the combination of that is very it's very like kind of part of my heritage, but also like I think that I do like the idea of spirituality. I don't like religion, I don't like church, but I do like the idea of having a spiritual practice, whether that's meditation or some kind of prayer or pilgrimages or holy spaces or whatever that is. I like religious art. I like Buddhist art. I like the idea of it all, but I don't like I don't like churches, and I don't like the idea of going.
There's so much these practices have in common with each other, right? It's some people call it meditating, some people call it praying, doing prostrations. There's so many different ways to call it. And I think a lot of people get so tripped up on how to define it, right? And they think there's this one true way that this practice of being just mindful has to be. And this trying to force fit something to the spirituality, mindfulness, there is no form, there is no shape. And in trying to fit it, we get into all of these art fights, these arguments and battles. And it sucks. It sucks for all the people that want to explore these things.
Right. I mean, there's just so much there to explore, and it doesn't have to feel like this crazy, like there's a real true answer. It's like it can just be explored. And I mean, I like it all. I think it's all really interesting.
I'm just curious. So you identify yourself as a Christian, and
I guess, but that doesn't even really fit. I would just
spiritual.
Say a seeker.
Yeah, a seeker.
Yeah, spiritual seeker maybe. I don't know. Christianity is so disappointing so many ways. So I would say everything.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I love?
Yeah.
I love the way the Filipinos are Christian when they get all they crucify themselves and stuff. You know, like how they do in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And during Easter. Like, it's so great. It's just like Folsom Street Fair or something. Like, it's like they get real, like, public and real, like...
Yeah, really into
it. Very crazy. They get into it. And I'm like, I like that. But I wouldn't say that would necessarily be Christian.
But it's how they define it, right? It's the way that they want to be.
It's Catholicism,
Yeah.
But it's so, like... visceral and bloody and crazy. Like, I've gone to Mexico a lot during Semana Santa, which is like Holy Week before Easter. And they do all of the crazy, like, self-flagellation and all this bloodletting.
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
so crazy, but it's cool. And it's just like going to Folsom Street Fair. It's like there's nothing different really.
Nothing's
It's
different
just
for Folsom.
they're all doing the same stuff. It's great.
Yeah. I always seek people who really challenge the norms, just like push it out there and give it your own spin and give it your own flavor.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
We're all so different. And I think it's largely due to our intersections of our identities too, right?
Right.
How does the sexuality even fit within the context of spirituality, gender identity? And I had a question for you. So some people find spirituality extremely contradictory with being queer, being bisexual, gay, lesbian, primarily because there's so many religious organizations that are really hurtful for queer people.
Yeah.
And I'm just really curious, how has it been for you to navigate this spiritual life while being bisexual?
Well, I don't buy any of those kinds of ideologies that somehow discount homosexuality or think somehow that it negates your spiritual life. That's really, to me, you don't have a right to say that about other people who have different kinds of sexuality. So I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I do think that, we should be able to seek God and also be true to who we are and who we want to love. There shouldn't be a divide there.
Yeah. And a big question I get from a lot of my listeners is, how do I even get started? How do I even get into this practice? They see a lot of us. So I'm fairly spiritual. I meditate every day. I attribute a lot of my happiness to it, a lot of my peace, serenity.
Yeah, it's great.
It is. And I'm just curious, do you have any advice for somebody who wants to get started in this, and what has worked for you?
Well, for me, it's like a constant, like I'm constantly in a communication with whatever is divine. That for me, it's like more about constant prayer and constant communication. It's kind of like I'm always on the phone with God, but then I'll do my interruptions to do my life. So like life is just like, for me, like kind of one long meditation or one long prayer. And it's interspersed with social activities and sex. And so even sex can be prayer too, in its own way or whatever. But it's like, I am just kind of like down with hanging out with whatever is divine all the time. But you get there through, I think, just trying to decide of like, where do I think God is, or what do I want God to be? And that's more of like a choice.
Some might call it God, some call it Mother Earth.
Right. Or spirit, or the universe, or light, or whatever it is. But it's not me. That's the main kind of, it's like, I'm not in charge. Something else is, and I choose to call it God, but it can be many names.
And when we act from our place of truth, this voice speaks through us. And I find when we do things that speaks and aligns with our truth, and this voice speaks to us, it resonates, and it's telling us you are on the right path.
Yeah, it's a nice thing, and it's good reassurance, and it's just about peacefulness, and I love that.
You do comedy, you stand-up comedy, but not just that. I see you integrate it so beautifully with activism work. You talk about bullying and sexual abuse. And I just applaud you so much for doing this, because I also see, and I also see the people who are really uncomfortable by it too, right? And I'm just curious, what inspires you to continue integrating this, even though there are people who just don't want to hear it sometimes as a part of comedy?
Well, it's hard because it's like, but it's just comfortable for me. And it's kind of like, oh, well, I'll one day perfect a way to relate this that will be comfortable. And, it's more like trial and error. Let me get there and then like try to figure out what the right way. But to me, it's worthwhile. These are the kinds of things that I would like to hear about. Like as a comedian, like I would like to hear a comedian be skilled at these very painful things talking about, so that's what I would like as an audience member. So I would sort of try to like satisfy myself as if I was part of the audience.
Creating the show that you want to watch, Right.
Yeah, and it's like eventually it'll be perfected, but it's like a matter of time before it gets there. But I think it'll work itself out.
For even, what I say is, for even the people who don't even talk about it, I think that's okay too.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to talk about anything, but comedy's an interesting art form, and so it's taken a lifetime for me to sort of figure it out, and still figuring it out.
Yeah, and you've been in the game for so long now, and doing comedy, changing your work. What have you learned about that? What have you learned along the way?
Well, I learned that it's definitely it's something that people need to realize. Like, you have to be the heroic part of the story. Like, that's what they want from a comedian, is for the comedian to really win. And if you don't, with those situations where you don't win, it's very hard for them to accept that. So it's always sort of part of that hero's journey, or like, how can you be heroic in something and yet appear not to win? And that's sort of like the thing that we all go through. So it's really just getting there, trying to figure it out.
And so I know you are right now, you're on tour on Fresh Off of the Bloat. And I just wanted to get my listeners to hear from your perspective. What is it about, and what else are you working on?
Well, it's about a lot of things. It's kind of a lot about everything, and it's always about everything. And it's a lot about, like, also Asian Americans coming into this place of being part of movies and TV in a way that we haven't before. And that's really exciting. So there's a lot of different things about exploration, about singleness, about being partnered with all sorts of different people, being single with all sorts of different people, having fun. There's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah. One question I have for you is, because your tour is all around the world, essentially, and you're traveling so often, how do you stay mindful and present while you travel everywhere?
Well, it's kind of in my nature, or I try to be. I try to make it my nature, but I also travel with my dog, which helps. She's a little Chihuahua, Lucia, and
so
she's
cute.
Very present and very in the moment all the time. So that helps push me into the moment as well.
Yeah, some people say, babies and animals, they are enlightened beings because they can be so present.
Yes. And they are right there, and that's really you learn a lot. It's really incredible.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And so to kind of wrap up, I wanted to ask you 3 really quick rapid fire questions.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Yes. The first question is, what do we need more of in life?
Laughter.
Laughter. Yes. Yeah. And what do we need less of in life?
Anger.
That's a good one. And lastly, what is inspiring you lately?
I think just light in the way it changes over the year. Like, I can definitely tell it's February from the way that the light is. And I've learned that from like 51 Februaries. And like, I realize, I see the time now in the way the sun is. And I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Margaret. It was an absolute joy to have you. And, thank you so much for doing all the work for our community. You are a big voice for the queer, bisexual community and for Asian voices as well. So really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Yes, people are curious. How can people reach out to you and get in touch?
I am on the socials at Margaret Cho on Twitter, Margaret_Cho on Insta, and at Margaret Cho anywhere.
Yes. And I love your pictures of your dog. So cute.
Thank you. She's so cute.
So definitely check her out on her social media. If you also want to get in touch with me, you can find me on social at Stephen Wakabayashi. Well, with that, thank you so much, and hope your day can be a little bit more mindful. Bye now.
Bye-bye.